Yeah, so hi, I'm insyirah. I've picked the poem Words by Sylvia Plath, and I'll read the poem first. X's, after whose stroke the wood rings, and he echoes travelling off from the centre like horses. The sap wells like tears, like the water striving to re-establish its mirror over the rock. That drops and turns, a white skull, eaten by weedy greens. Years later I encounter them on the road. Words, dry and riderless. The indefatigable hoof-taps. While, from the bottom of the pool, fixed stars govern a life. Yeah, so it's quite a compact poem, and yeah, I'm not the best reader of poems, but it reads as like a whole sentence, I guess, in a way. I mean, there's the interruption of like echoes in the first stanza, but yeah, I picked this poem because I feel like it's a really good meditation on like just the vocation of a writer, like herself, like as Plath was like an excellent writer like throughout her life. And it sort of charts like what words would mean to a writer, like from the beginning of their career, like from the conception of like writing them, the end of their writing career, or their life. And Plath met quite a tragic ending in her life, and I guess that you could also connect that to what words meant to her in this poem. Yeah, so I guess I'll go stanza by stanza because I feel like there is an interesting like narrative trajectory that like you can follow through this poem, like using the images. It starts off with like X's, right? Which in this poem, like I guess when you first encounter the word X's, like the connotation is often like violent, but when you go through the next two lines, like to me it's something that's more, hopeful, or something that is creative and like something that can reshape. And I guess connecting the word words to X's at the start of this poem to me is really interesting because obviously the ability of words to like hurt, to like create pain, but also connecting it to the idea of something that can create echoes that travel like in such a free and unbridled way, like horses, even a crazed way, like off from the center. It's really about this idea of words becoming something like beyond you, beyond the pain of writing. Like words can also chart your legacy, like become something separate from you. So I think that's what she's saying in this first stanza. And then like there's the idea too of the sap, right, which is also an ambiguous like image to me, like beyond X's. It's like sap is like sort of like the blood of trees, it's like sort of like something from the inside to the outside, like a revelation almost. But it's also kind of like healing, like catharsis. Trees bleed sap in order to plug up their wounds in a way. So yeah, and it's like the connection to the body and like the welling of tears. Yeah, so like there's this like image of like pain, and like this next image here is like I kind of struggle with it sometimes too. Like like what it means to me still changes sometimes, but it's like this, I guess this image of what I picture is like a rock falling into a pool that is still, and like disrupting the pool and like creating like ripples and like disrupting the cool surface of the water, and like disfiguring the image that you see in it, like a reflection. Yeah, and what I interpret this is like like the disquiet that arises from like the reflective nature of writing. So like writing becomes something that's cathartic, like in the sap, in the X's, but it also becomes something that it changes your image of yourself. It's not something that is just cathartic, but it's something that's really active, not just passive. Yeah. And then this next image really connects to or begins, I guess, the idea of death in the poem, like the white skull eaten by weedy greens. And to me, this can be interpreted in a few ways as well. It's also quite ambiguous, honestly. I guess I could see in one way as like the death of the self, of like the poet, right, through their words. That once the words have dropped and turned, like they're consumed by weedy greens. But also like the idea of words taking on a life of their own. Like we talked earlier about how words are like horses that travel off from the center. So I guess and also echoes, right? As readers, do we like reflect the echoes of like the writers of the past who we read? Are we like somewhat like the weedy greens who reshape what authors of the past have like written and like make their meaning something meaningful to us? And like this last part here is something that becomes more personal, I guess, to like the writer. It's like this idea of words that really are dry and riderless, as opposed to like the rock that was covered in water. Now it's something that is distant, maybe like the death of meaning in a way, or like the death of like I guess like a personal kind of connection to them, because they become so far removed, right? And like this really like depressing final image to me, which is like how while the words are like free to run off, like I struggle with this word, the indefatigable hoof-taps, right? Is compared to like the writer who is really fixed, still at the bottom of a pool, so the separation that is finally fixed between the writer and the words that he write. Yeah, so as a whole, I see this as like something that, as a writer myself, it's something that I'm definitely like considering every time I write. It's like, what will this mean to me in the future? Like, will I feel a distance from like the words that I write? Like right now I might be feeling like something that releases like a lot of pain and stress like in my life. It helps me like reflect on myself too, but let's say like disrupt like this image that I create of myself. Yeah. So it's a very like introspective poem, and also like very ambiguous in many of the images that it takes. Yeah, and I'm done rambling now. Thanks for listening.
The images are so hard to understand actually.
Yeah,
because it's a really unconventional way to describe writing process.
Yeah, for sure. Because like often like writing is like connected to like legacy, like after you die, like your words become you, that kind of thing. It's more of a kind of like heroic or like a positive image that's presented. But like here it's like this separation of like the self from the words is like something that's quite tragic, especially from a writer like who is so well respected like Plath, whose words are like held in such high regard. Like this idea of her being separated from her words is like quite unnerving to us, I think.
I guess that only reinforces the sentiment behind this poem, right? Because like, the words itself, it doesn't seem to present like a very coherent image.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Yeah, the images are like extremely, like to me, like there is, I think there's a very deliberate like choice here to use very ambiguous, like detached images,
There's
like,
so many
it
things
moves
going
from
on.
like axes to like horses.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all over the place, and I think that is a deliberate choice because like the title of the poem, like words, is like super, it's just very ambiguous. Yeah, I think there's a lot of room in this poem for interpretation.
Yeah.
I guess in a way the words are also out of control, right? Like the horses. It's kind of going all over the place, and later they become dry and riderless, tapping indefatigably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like completely lost control of the words.
Yeah, definitely.
Instead of like writing them and telling them where to go, they're just doing their own thing. It's not up to you to do anything about it.
I like to relate this to like the idea of like separating the author from their work. It's like, does the author ever really own their work? Like the moment that someone else, kisses their eye over like someone else's work, like is it ever really your own? Or was it ever really yours? Are you just like the handler of words, and like when someone reads the meaning, like it's something that's out of your control?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because once you put a text outside into the world, then the meaning is shaped by the readers, right?
Yeah. And I find it interesting that to take this poem out of context a little bit, I guess to put it into context a little bit, Sylvia Plath, like I think she owned a horse while she was alive, and so I guess like she's like very familiar with like this image of the horse as like something that's very free, something that to her was like a way to feel free. Like I recall like in her collection Ariel, like she has a poem about her horse named Ariel. It's like a black horse, right? And I don't exactly remember that poem, but beyond its form, like I feel like the form was very interesting because like it was something that was like really, really like fast paced, like it carried you forward, and like it's just like this feeling of like unbridled freedom, but that freedom is like turned on its head here, like it's like made use of to words and like this detachment. Yeah. And I think Words was also one of the last few poems that she wrote in her life. So like you're seeing like the trajectory of a writer as well, like in terms of what words mean to them.
Yeah. Actually, now you say it, is it the last I feel like it might have been the last poem in her collected poems. Because somehow I just
Yeah,
remember
it
words
is.
being like the last poem inside that collection.
Yeah, what's definitely the last poem in Ariel. But I think that in terms of the ones that were written, I
Not
think that her
chronologically
husband reordered some of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm not particularly sure on that.
I think one thing I'm confused about is what does the pool symbolize? The pool of water.
Yeah, I struggle with that image too. Yeah, but it's like that idea of the mirror and like the pool. I guess the pool is like this fixedness of like the self-image, that is
Yeah.
disrupted, or like being stuck in your self-image,
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but there is definitely a lot of ambiguity to work through this poem. Yeah, I come back to this poem quite often, and I guess the reason why I would choose a poem that still somewhat eludes me in understanding is because like every time I come back to this poem, like I find something different, And I guess like if you want to talk about poetry in general, right, and like some listeners might feel like poetry is like very inaccessible because of like the ambiguity that is like essential to the genre, right? Like how difficult it might be to like understand a poem like immediately upon reading it. I feel like sometimes it's fine to not get it straight away, or like for your interpretation to change. You know what I mean? Like coming back to a poem over time, it's like it's fine not to grasp it right away. Something that grows on you, like something that as you experience things in life, like you might notice something you didn't before. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like when reading poems, sometimes there are poems which I don't understand at first glance, right? But somehow I just feel like it's a poem that I would love to read again and again. Like it's a poem that resonates with me.
Sometimes it's just the beauty of the language,
Yeah.
It's not so much that and it's nice that they're not dictating. They're not saying this is what the message of my poem is. Sometimes it's enough to just let it wash over you, and then you can revisit it and think, I understand where the poet was going with that.
I guess that is what Plath is talking about here. I mean, she's talking about it in relation to herself. But I guess when we like, as the readers who like, take control of the horses that come to us, like I guess, we are giving them new meaning. I guess like letting them continue writing, something like that.
Yeah, because like the words are already riding away riderless, unbridled, freely, right? There still seems to be some kind of agency and control in the last few lines, because from the bottom of the pool perhaps being the consciousness of the writer, right? Fixed stars govern her life, so maybe the writer is still in control somehow.
Maybe, like, honestly, you could, I mean, I would read it as the opposite, like maybe, in the second stanza, there's all the sap flowing out of the tree, moving about, maybe, like the words, the meaning taking form, reestablishing itself. But by the end of the poem, when you think of a pool, you don't think of something that's in motion. It's sort of something that's very, still. And I guess set in stone is the wrong phrasing. But it's very still and it's very unmoving. So all of this, fluid, this sap that has been, like shifting around and morphing into something new has now settled in a very still pool. And then, maybe there's almost this sense of finality, really, from the bottom of the pool. The control is out of the poet's hands now, and the words have, you can just sort of watch and see where it goes.
Yeah, there's like this ultimate distance to like from the bottom of the pool and like the height of the stars that are fixed, right? It's like this like ultimate rigidity and like detachment from your own destiny.
Yeah. Sort of finally escaped.
Yeah. I think when you were reading this poem, I was reminded of another poem of Plath as well, and it's also about writing. It's called Poems Potatoes. Have you heard of that poem?
I have not, but I love that title.
I think she compared her poems to potatoes, like how ugly they are or something. Yeah, I think how like her poems dissatisfy her ultimately. Yeah, like no matter how much she molds them, they still dissatisfy her.
Oh, like potatoes.
Yeah. Wait, let me quote it. Sturdy as potatoes, stones without conscience, word and line endure, given an inch. Not that they're gross, although afterthought would often have them alter to delicacy, to poise.
Mm.
It's a funny poem.
Yeah, I'm reading it now and like, yeah, I really love like her ability to, pick such a hilarious, I guess, image, if you want to contextualize it, like, as opposed to words. But, it makes a good point too about writing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just
Okay.
going to say, like, I'm not a person who writes very much at all. And I think it was really helpful going through the whole thing together. Especially, like hearing Insyirah's perspective and what it means to her. Because, I think I would have been totally lost.
Yeah, totally.
Without it. Because, it's not something I can relate to very well.
So I find it quite interesting that Jovan and I also picked rather similar poems, right? Poems about creating art and writing. Because Jovan's was also about writing poetry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a surprising amount of poems about poems, Like, I remember, like, doing, the Renaissance paper in A-levels, and, like, the first, like, poem in, like, some of, like, the sonnets, like, these are the earliest sonnets in the English language that were written. It's about poetry itself. It was about writing. So I feel like writers have been meditating on writing for a really long time.
Yeah.
And, like, making poems about this predicament. And I find it really nice, It's like a gateway for new writers to start thinking about their craft, Yeah, it's